Good morning. This is Monet Ihanacho with the NEMSIS Technical Assistance Center. Thank you so much for joining the training today. Today, the webinar is intended for state and territory EMS data managers, and the focus of the discussion is to learn how to use the new V3 data submission summary email that's under development. Today is Thursday, November 9th, and we welcome you to this presentation. And I will now turn the time over to Kevin White.
Hi, this is Kevin White with the NEMSIS TAC. Thank you so much, Monet, for that nice introduction and letting everyone know what the agenda is for today. Is everyone able to view my screen without any trouble? That is my first question out to everyone. Anyone having any issues with that? No? Good.
No issues. Yep.
Okay, great. So first, as Monet said, we're going to look at some dashboards and some information that we've developed for the state data manager to help you monitor what's going on with your submissions to us here at the NEMSIS TAC for the version 3 of the data set. Many of you have seen a dashboard, or some of you at least have seen a dashboard before or been exposed to it before. We have gotten some feedback in the past that dashboard is very complex. And so knowing that, we've endeavored to provide a gentler summary of that information, as well as something that can be easily delivered in email. And that's the first thing, that's what you're seeing on your screen right now, is our first attempt, really, at an email outbound summary of submission information. And you will, if you choose to do so, you will receive this email for you, for your state, every week, more than likely on Monday mornings. And it will come as an image, which is what we have right now, just a static flat image with your information clearly displayed. There is an interactive version that we will jump to in a minute, but first I want to make sure that we go through this image and understand what the information is, because this will be your first look at this information every week without any interaction. So we have what we're calling up here first is sort of our stoplights, which are just this very basic, good warning, caution, something's wrong information across three different critical metrics. And we'll go through them just left to right. If at any time you have a question about any of these, please either put it into the chat window or speak up. I work best interactively, where people are asking me questions as I go along. This first piece of information here on the left is failed submissions. This is a submission of any type, whether it be a patient submission for patient care reports or for demographic data. And it's in cases where that submission failed for any reason. Some reasons can be, as some of you have seen, an error on our end. Some of them, another reason for a submission can be that the XML that was submitted to us wasn't correctly formatted. Or, as sometimes is the case, particularly as states are brand new to submitting data to version 3, we sometimes see that we have to reject a submission because while the patient care report information is valid, we don't yet have the demographic information for the EMS agency. And so at that point, we have to reject that submission. So that information is here. Is there any question before I move on to the next one, active agencies? Any question about that metric?
This is Sharon
Okay.
from Nebraska, and
yes,
I just wondered
Sharon.
if is this
system currently functioning, or is it something that's in development?
This is currently in development, and this is why we're here today to solicit your feedback on this before we push it out into development. We want to make sure this information is actionable and relevant to you.
Okay. All right, because I was subscribed to one that's similar to this, but I wasn't getting the reports, and so I wondered if this is going to take the place of that system.
It's not going to take the place. It's going to augment, and we hope, provide a better, more actionable summary. The idea of this email is to let you know very quickly what happened in the last week with your submissions. Is there anything that you need to look at and dig deeper into, or is you can just go about your week and not worry until the next time you see this email?
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Any other questions before we move on? All right. The next box, the middle box, is active agencies. And what this is the list, it's the ratio of agencies that are active, in the sense that submitted data to us, submitted a patient care report to us in the last week, and for which we have a demographic information. As I just stated about the previous metric, sometimes we get patient care reports, but we don't get the demographic information, and so we have to reject the record. So that's the numerator here, is number of agencies that submitted data to us and that we've accepted their data, their patient care report data, in the past week. The denominator for this is total number of agencies for which we have accepted demographic data. So it gets you, the idea here is that it lets you see the share of agencies that are active in any current and in the past week of those agencies that we have actually accepted data from for you for all time. Does that make sense? I want to make sure that's firmly grounded, because there's another metric that we have on agencies, and the difference can be really important.
Can I give an example, Kevin?
Yeah, please. Thank you.
So let's say that there's a state that has 300 EMS agencies that you've shared with us that you expect to submit data to you and then eventually to the NEMSIS TAC. So if you have 300 agencies in your system, and let's say you have 100 agencies currently submitting data to you, and if NEMSIS has received 10 demographic files describing EMS agencies from that state, but we're only receiving 2 agencies' PCRs in a given week, then it'll be 2 out of 10, correct, Kevin?
That is correct.
So those are the three numbers that we're going to be looking at then, is active agencies in a given week or over time, the number of demographic files that we've received for your state EMS agencies, and the number of agencies that we understand operate in your state that you expect to transition to version 3 and receive PCR data for, event response data for. Thanks, Kevin.
Hey, Kevin, it's Kathy from PA.
Hi.
Are we going to be able to, click on this and know, who did not send them, so that we could call them or find out what's going on if they're not submitting?
We do have we do have a view of the data that's more detailed that will allow you to obtain that information.
Okay.
Or it'll show you the list of agencies for which we have accepted data and their count, essentially their count of patient care records that we've received for the agency over the past week.
And that will also include like the ones that failed, so we can see who failed and why.
Well, it'll be we won't necessarily know, because when we fail a submission, we don't know what agencies were in. We don't know what records or what agencies were in that submission. So if a submission comes to us and it's failed, the only information that we have on a submission failure is what state submitted what state sent us the failed submission, and what time it occurred, and the reason for the failure. We don't know the contents of that submission. So if an agency is submitting data to you, and then you're submitting that data to us, and we reject that the submission for that agency, we don't know we can't tell you what agency caused the failure, unless it was a case of we failed it specifically because we didn't receive demographic info for that agency. Then in that case, then we do know and we do report it. There's a view I'll show you hopefully later on that lists missing agencies and even attempts to count the number of records that you could have sent to us had you submitted the demographic information for that agency. Does that help you at all, Kathy?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, it helps, Kevin.
Okay, great. All right, let's move on to. We've got a lot to cover, so let's move on to submission warnings. So submission warnings, as everyone probably knows, has probably heard the term Schematron when it relates to version 3 data and validation of that data. So Schematron warnings are something that we track. A warning is really what it sounds. It's a message back saying this aspect of this patient care report might not be accurate, and here's why it might not be accurate. One warning that we see fairly consistently, for example, is time sequencing. That sometimes the date and time upon which we recorded a unit arrived on scene is out of sequence from the other times that we record, such as unit notified by dispatch time, or unit back in service time. And that's a pretty common warning. But we won't reject a record because times are out of sequence, but we will flag it as a warning. And this box here, submission warnings, is the share of submissions that didn't fail, but did have at least one warning associated with it. And so so that's what we're seeing here, is just how many of the submissions that you sent us last week had a warning, at least one warning associated with it. Does that jive with everyone? Does that make sense? Okay. So
this is Sharon. I have a question about that.
Yes.
So
yes, absolutely.
When we get these reports that have the warnings and the failed submissions, are those the Schematron that the state has developed, or is it the warnings that NEMSIS has developed?
So these are only warnings that we ourselves here at the NEMSIS TAC in our system records. So it's our Schematron validation.
Okay. Okay, so the schematron that Nebraska created for Nebraska is not documented in this report. This is just the NMSIS.
Correct. This is just the national level. This is the national schematron validation.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Okay. We'll move down here to this more middle section, which is the submission timeline that we have available here. This is simply a chart giving you a count of submissions, and again, without respect to data set type, so EMS as well as patient care report submissions that occurred by day over the previous week. We do include a nice average line, and this is the average for the week under which this occurred. So in this case, we're looking at February 1st through February 8th. That average for Rhode Island over the course of that week was 1,000, 1,100 or so submissions per day. We do have a little bit of segmentation here that shows accepted versus rejected. We don't segment out warnings here, so many of these. So, for example, on February 5th, we accepted, an above average number of submissions, but there's no segment. There's nothing here in this timeline that allows you to see the difference between without warnings versus with warnings. But we do show rejections. So this 18.4%, that's generated out of February 6th and February 7th, which are the only days during this week where we rejected a bunch of submissions. How is that for everyone? Does that make sense? Okay, great. Moving forward, we have just two more metrics to go through on this email. These are somewhat different than what we've got up above. These are more sort of a status over of all time that will allow you to see kind of where you are in place versus where you were over the past week. This first one is total EMS agencies accepted to date. If you recall earlier when we were talking about active agencies, Karen spoke about the share, how active agencies is out of total number of demographic files we've accepted, as opposed to number of agencies that we understand here at the NMSIS TAC are licensed to operate within your state. And this here is the share of agencies for which we have accepted a demographic file out of the total number of EMS agencies licensed within your state. And so this gives you an idea that the denominator of this, of active agencies, is the numerator of this. The denominator here is licensed EMS agencies. So this 87.8% is a share of this 54.4%. How does that sit with everyone?
So, Kevin, this is Clay. Can I restate that? So,
yes, absolutely.
Just to make sure I kind of understand it. So, the square above the active EMS agencies, this provides you a measure of like who submitted this week, right? So you get this email weekly. You can kind of see, are you in the green, or are most agencies still submitting? And then and then the one below gives you kind of a running tally of the number of agencies that have come on to NEMSIS version 3 and how that's growing. Is that a good kind of summary?
Yes, that's excellent.
And Melissa, can I give an example of what's happening in Washington right now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure.
So Washington has what? You have roughly, let's just say you have roughly 300, right? So not like that was my example I was trying to use before, but you have a large number of EMS agencies in the state of Washington. Currently, you have approximately 130 EMS agencies submitting live version 3 data to you. As of last week, NEMSIS is literally only receiving 10 of those EMS agencies from you. But we've received, I think it was something like 24 demographic files. So we have been working together to resolve that. But what this dashboard would allow in an email is you would be able to see then over time as those numbers change. So this week alone, we've received some additional demographic files from Washington. So we're now up to 66 demographic files describing the EMS agencies with the goal to at least get to those 130 of the EMS agencies that are submitting version 3 data to Washington so that eventually we can get to, 100% in that green box up above. But even if we get to the 130, the bottom box would then be 130 divided by, and again, let's just say it's 300 EMS agencies in Washington. So then it'd be dividing, getting that percentage of 120 of the 300. So our goal is that when you get this email, you would have a picture, and then there's some additional information that Kevin will go over, but you'll be able to have a picture right away that gives you an idea of the growth of your system and, some alerting tools that will help you see that more readily than having to dig into the data.
Excellent. Thank you, Karin. And with that, I'll ask again, is there any question about this total EMS agencies accepted to date or any of the above information? Excellent. All right. Our last metric here in this view is just an accumulation of total patient care reports that we've accepted year to date. So this year being 2017, this is the number of patient care reports that we've accepted year to date, in this case ending February 8th, from Rhode Island, 23,077. So each week you'll see this number hopefully rise, at worst stay the same, but it shouldn't go down, certainly. But it should always be giving you an idea of where you sit, at least year to date, in terms of number of patient care reports accepted. We here at the NEMSIS TAC don't know how many patient care reports are generated in your state. We have an idea from past performance, but we don't know. Only you have a good idea of that and can get an idea from this, hopefully, of what's going on in terms of rate at which patient care reports are being submitted to us. Does that metric make sense? Okay, great. So I'll point out also that we have definitions down here for each of these metrics. These definitions will be persistent. They'll always be at the bottom of this email that you receive every week. But to that point, what I want to, before we move into more detail into other areas of data submission reporting, I want to restate again that the idea of this email is that it gives you a weekly actionable summary of what's going on with your submissions to the NEMSIS TAC. It should prompt you to either say, everything's fine, I don't need to worry about the NEMSIS TAC this week, or there's something going on here, I need to investigate further as to what's happening with my submissions. So to that point, I really want to know, are the metrics that we've provided in this initial version relevant? Do they meet those goals, or are there other metrics that you think would be more actionable from your end, or prompt you to, again, investigate what's going on? So no one has any other ideas about what would be more relevant, or any comment on whether or not any of these are at all relevant. Okay, we will move forward with looking at the other views, some of which should be familiar to some of you who have been looking at your submissions regularly over your time with the version 3 dataset. First, I'm going to as we do that, I want to lay out that this email will get sent to you every week if you choose, and it comes as a static image. If you click on that image in your email, you will, after being prompted to log in, will come to our reporting server here at the NEMSIS TAC, and it will be the exact same thing that you just received in your email, with the addition that it's a little bit interactive for you. You can start to see, you can mouse over things and start to see a little bit of what's going on. I do know that there's this little visual glitch here, that this box is bigger than these other two boxes. We're working on that. As I said, this is still something of a work in progress. But this view is where you land, but it doesn't really get you all that much more information, except it allows you to see denominators, which you couldn't see before. Many of you know that there's more detail that we have available in a different on data submission, and I'll go right there to this. This is again probably familiar to many of you. This is what we call what was our submission summary, which is now really the email, but this is a more detailed summary. And I'm not going to go through absolutely every line here in detail, because we'll be here for another probably 2 to 3 hours if I were. What I want to know, though, particularly from people who have seen this before, is I'll give you a little peek behind the curtain. Right now, we're having trouble getting this view, this really highly detailed summary view, and the things behind it out and refreshed and updated every week. It's a little bit problematic for us, and because there's so much information in here. And we would really like to hear from people as to what's really not relevant at all on these larger views. And I'm going to jump actually right to probably the most troublesome, which is the detail that we have on accepted PCRs. So this is information on the number. This is very detailed information on what happened with the number of PCRs over the past week. And it gives you all different views, particularly around those schematron warnings that we talked about earlier. It gives you these nice counts of with and without schematron warnings, which is not something that you can see at least at this level of detail within that summary email. We give this heat map over here. We give a geographic information. We give by element, by agency, by schematron pattern, by software package, and even information on the messages themselves. Like, as I talked about, that sequencing, that time sequencing warning, which is almost surely somewhere within here. We've gotten some feedback in the past that a lot of this information is just not relevant. But we would really love to hear from the people who actually use this dashboard, what is the stuff that they just skip right over, that they just don't even bother to look at, and stuff that we can eliminate for visual clutter reasons and for performance reasons.
This
So
is
we're
Anna.
really helping
Oh.
Yes.
Oh. Hi. I was just, for myself, looking at this thinking I probably, at a state level, would not really look at average warnings by zip code level. I'm more interested in the agencies level data. The zip code, I mean, I have overlapping areas with first responders and transporters, so I don't know if I would really use that. The other part is software package and version. I don't know if other people use that. Myself, I may be interested at the vendor name, like the software creator, but not necessarily like if you look at what you've got displayed right here, you've got image trim, but you got all the different elite packages, and I'm never going to go dig into my system probably and take the time to go to that level. So those are just my thoughts.
Excellent. That's very, very helpful. This in particular can get really long for vendors that push out a lot of updates. We've seen this list be absolutely huge and more than a little bewildering. Does anyone have any comments?
Oh,
yes, please.
Sorry, I could add something. I know in my own software, and I happen to have Image Trend as a state product, I have not been able to figure out a good way to break down version 3.3.4 errors versus people submitting version 3.4. I can't even get it out of my own system because I happen to accept both versions. But if there was a way, because I believe you guys accept both currently, if there was a way you could break that out, that might be, at least for myself, interesting to see the different kinds of schematron issues that are coming up in B334 versus 3.4, and then perhaps also by vendor. That's it.
That's a great point. We could certainly add that. I think it might be great to add it maybe as a filter up here, unless you want a detailed breakdown somewhere within here, like here with these warnings and the violation messages. If you wanted to know, well, which of these are occurring in 3.4 versus 3.3.4. We can do either one of those.
I myself like filters because then it doesn't clog up the screen, but I don't know how other people feel about them.
Well, we can certainly try it out and expose it to you, and then see how well it works. Does anyone else have any information? Should we, as was suggested, should we shrink this for just down to software creator? Does anyone else think that the zip code map is at all of interest to them and something we should keep, or something we should dump?
And is, average warnings per PCR by unit notified date time, does that have any value to you?
So it does have value or it does not have value?
And so here's my one thought is we might need to get some more folks involved, because right now there's only 3 folks on the call who have access to this currently, because we have Charles from New Mexico, or Chaz from New Mexico, and Kathy and Kaylin from Pennsylvania, who have not yet submitted to NEMSIS. But then we have Ann from Arizona, Sharon from Nebraska, and Rashmi from Massachusetts also hasn't submitted, and then Melissa from Washington. And I'm not sure who viewer 67 is, if you're submitting to NEMSIS and if you've ever seen this data submission dashboard before or not. But I think a question that we would have is, we want to make these dashboards as useful to you as possible. So does it make a difference to you to see, when you might have more warnings or the zip codes that's happening in, or is it more important to be able to drill down to look at the agencies or the schematron pattern?
Hey, Karin, it's Kathy. I don't want to say, no, I don't need it, and then when we start submitting, go, oh, I wish we had that back. So until we get into it and, see how we're going to use it, yeah. I really don't know what would be good for me right now. I mean, yes, the by agency is definitely important so that we could, follow up with what's going on, but at this point, I don't want to say, well, maybe we don't need that, and then, turn around and once we start submitting data, go, oh, that would have been really good to have.
You don't know what you don't know yet, in essence.
Yeah,
right?
Really.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay. So, all right. So we've got some information. We'll on accepted PCR detail. Kev, before we leave, it's unfortunate, or before we move forward with some other things, I want to make sure, Kathy, that I covered that question that you had asked before. It doesn't appear for Rhode Island here in over this limited period of time, but Kathy, this is where you, when you have access to your report, this is where you would see on the EMS Agency Detail information about cases where we would have accepted a bunch of PCRs had you submitted demographic information for a particular agency. It would show up right here.
Okay.
And it would show up just as a bar chart, just like this, where it'd say, hey, EMS agency, for example, 33, had you submitted information for that agency to us, you would have gotten 10 more PCRs last week accepted by us. Instead, those were rejected by us.
Cool.
So let's stick on this EMS Agency Detail tab so that we can just quickly browse through this and see if there's anything here that we can eliminate. We know we can't eliminate this because it is important, but other information that we have on here is a breakdown of PCRs accepted by EMS agency. So looking at basically how is each EMS agency performing. We have, and this tends to be fairly important, at least this is important to us, certainly at the NEMSIS TAC. Whether or not it's important to you, I don't know. But this is the number of times that we have, that you have resubmitted demographic information for a particular agency. It's important to us because every time you submit information, we have to process it, and so it's a resource cost to us. But maybe you don't care, but I think most of you would like to know whether or not EMS agency demographic information is getting resubmitted constantly or not. And this last one is demographic submissions by home state. So as we know, some EMS agencies, they're licensed, they'll have multiple licenses in different states, and they'll declare one as a home state, and that home state may be different than your state. And so for some states, that there are a significant number of agencies where that's the case. For many states, it's not at all. It's a minor number. But whether or not it's relevant or people care, we don't know. We'd love to hear from you guys information about, again, is this information here on the EMS Agency tab good information, bad information? How about particularly this home state? Does anyone really feel that that's an important piece of information for them to know, or is it something that they don't really care about?
Okay, so could you define the home state, what exactly that means for me?
Hey, yes. Hey, Karin, you're a little bit more versed in the data set than I am in terms of version 3. Would you mind fielding that question?
Yeah, no problem. So one of the things that we receive with the data is we have identifiers in each element. So within the demographic section, there's an element called EMS Agency State. So it's D Agency 04. So the 3 elements that we always receive with each event submission for a PCR is EMS Agency Unique State ID, EMS Agency Number, D Agency 1 and 2, and then D Agency 04, EMS Agency State. So if you license an ambulance service that is based in another state, they may indicate that the home state is something other than Nebraska, for example. Literally, the definition for the element is the state territory which assigned the EMS agency number. So it should always be your state, but every now and again what we see coming into us is that the home state is literally where their base of operations is. So sometimes we'll receive D Agency 04 as a different state. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so this would just provide information to us that someone had entered it incorrectly then. Is that what
Pretty much, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Well summarized.
Is that of value?
It's possible that we could provide that information to you in another manner.
Yes, absolutely. We don't have to use a map. We can simply use a list, for example, like we have here, listing the EMS agency unique ID and the home state that is currently recorded.
Yeah, because if, like, for example, if Nebraska is only receiving information from people that are licensed in Nebraska, it should always be Nebraska, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
I think the only time it's really going to be different would be air services for the most part.
Right.
Yeah, that's probably true. In most instances, anyway.
Yeah, this is Clay. Maybe the other. Sorry, Kevin. I was just going to say. I think in regards to this visualization, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the upper half of this visualization, specific to agency detail, could be shown under the accepted PCR detail if you were to limit it to a certain agency, right? But this just makes it much more simple and clear to get these numbers, right? Does my question make sense?
Yeah, we made the design decision to separate out this agency detail into a separate view because we were providing all of this information. We wanted to group it together.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is a little redundancy here, and I think the other issue that we tried to address with this too is, though you can do it on the previous tab as well, would to be able to just quickly generate a report for a specific agency, turn it into a PCR, and be able to email it out, right? So if Melissa in Washington woke up on Monday morning and said, "Hey, I'm going to send data quality reports to the 10 worst offenders in the state of Washington. I'm going to find those and I generate PCRs and send them to them to welcome them to the new week, or something." Then this would be kind of an easier way to do that than through accepted PCR detail. But I think you'd be able to do that with either one of them.
Correct. You would be able to. All right. We are getting a little short on time. We've only got 10 minutes left. And I want to leave some time for additional time at the end for questions and wrap up. There's only one additional tab, one additional view that we have available here. And this is what we call our submission detail. And this is, as before, we talked about submissions without respect to patient care report or EMS demographic information. That's the level at which we're looking at here again, but in more detail. So this view has not as much information as others, thankfully, but it's still a significant amount of information. We have, as is common, and we've already seen this before, is submissions accepted versus rejected, which seems to be highly relevant information. You want to know on a particular day, did you get all your submissions in, or did some of them get kicked back out? We then have again one of these heat maps that shows you really density. Where are most of your submissions occurring, and where in time, I should say. And for Rhode Island during this past week, looks like Wednesday, 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. is their highest number, where they're generating most of their submissions. The other information we have is just here, just looking at some information, and we do have this broken out by version, is errors and how they break down. It's grand total of errors, looking at fatal server errors, which are errors on our end. We had patient care reports. We ended up rejecting 176 of those, and a lot of EMS agency demographic information on our end. So these errors really were fatal server errors, and they were more than likely an issue on our end that we needed to take care of, rather than, for example, as I said before, poorly formed XML is probably the most common example of what we see, along with no agency demographic information associated with the submission. All right. We, again, as before, we'd really love to hear from people as to what information here is relevant to them. For example, do you care about when your submissions get sent to us in terms of a breakdown by weekday and hour, or is that just of no interest to you whatsoever? Are you more focused on up here and down here?
I think generally it's helpful.
This was looking at this breakdown by weekday and hour block?
Yeah, it's going to identify when most of the traffic is getting submitted. I think that's good. That's helpful. Yeah.
Do you find that that's also true when we look at, so for example, over here on accepted PCR detail, this is a similar breakdown, but in this case, it's unit notified date and time. So reading in and knowing where the average number of warnings occurring. So this is not submission. This is, we've accepted PCRs, but out of looking at all your PCRs, these are when you're generating, this is your average number of warnings. So for example, for Rhode Island, it seems that Monday 6 p.m. to 12 a.m. is where they're generating their highest average warnings. Tuesday midday is kind of the second highest. Is that of interest to you at the state level to know when, over the course of a week, most of your warnings are being generated? We're assuming these are high volume times, but maybe they're not.
I think that could give us insight into looking further as to, like you said, call volume and when the highest call volume is, and then by service, breaking down when the most errors are being generated.
And that's true. It's something I didn't mention before, but if we were to, for example, select that 1.3 box, then this is one of the nice features of this dashboard. Everything else is filtered based on that information. So now we're only looking at data that occurred on Monday between 6 p.m. and 12 a.m. And so we can start to see, you know, agencies and software, what patterns are being violated. So we'll give you more detail on the errors itself, or the warnings itself, so that you can do that deeper dive.
Right.
Yeah, that's this is Clay. That's an insightful comment. Yeah, because right, so you can above limit it to a specific agency, and then, you know, if they wanted to know what shift these errors are occurring, right? Because it may, the software may be working perfectly, but maybe there's a provider in that agency that just doesn't quite understand, you know, some aspect of the data collection process. So you'd be able to tell that agency, well, it's the shift that covered Monday, you know, from 6 p.m. to 12 a.m., you know, kind of a thing, and you can show them what was happening. Yeah, so the dive down would be helpful.
Kevin, can you also share, I think it's it is on this section of the data submission dashboard, how one can actually drill down and identify the PCR?
Yes. So in order to do that, you'd have to actually make a selection. So you have to choose a relevant section of information. And I just select that 1.3. And then we go over to this little box over here on the tooltip called View Data. I'll make this a little bit smaller. So it gives us a little bit of a summary here. And then click on Full Data. And then this is the key. Show all columns. And to Karin's point, one of the columns that is in here is PCR number.
Nice.
If you wanted to, you could then, so you have this view right here, and then you can download, by clicking that link, all rows as a text file. And you've now exported this information out, and by default in Excel, and you can dig deeper and find out, well, here are the patient care reports that are causing this problem. This is very detailed. It is a lot of columns and oftentimes a lot of rows. So it's not something I encourage people to do on a regular basis, to come in here and download all the data all the time, but if you really need that information, you can get it.
Thanks for showing that, Kevin. That's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have about 1 minute left, at least according to our allotted time. So let's wrap up and say, first of all, thank you very much for your time and for the valuable information. And I'll just leave it as, does anyone else have additional questions? If they're not something I can answer quickly, then we can pick it offline.
Hey, Gav, it's Kathy. Real quick, are you going to do a cube for 3 too, or no?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
That is in that's in our contract. We definitely will be producing a cube for version 3.
All right, awesome.
Any other questions or comments? All right, Monet, I will kick everything back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I don't know if you noticed that we had quite a few viewers who participated somehow on the call without identifying themselves as their name and state, and so I had to kick a bunch of people off. And so moving forward, we would like to ensure that people are identifying themselves. And then I also want to let you know that I'm in the process of creating a calendar of all the trainings. I would like to put together a 2018 calendar for trainings for both state and territory data managers as well as for the public. And if you have any ideas for trainings, please send me an email. And if you would also like to be a presenter, we would welcome that opportunity as well. So I'm excited for the trainings that we can provide for the new year, and thank you so much for participating again. Okay, have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.